Welcome, my name is Mike Kern. I'm a QA architect with Intellitect, which means I focus a lot on mostly automated testing, but also some manual testing and delivery processes. Today we're going to be looking at the .NET version of Playwright. There are also Node, Python, and Java versions. I believe that's the third one. There's a lot we're not going to cover. They've packed a lot into this tool, but hopefully this will give you a foundation for getting started. So this is just your garden variety XUnit project targeting .NET 7. So we're gonna do some house cleaning, convert that to a file scope namespace. Gonna rename this. So the way Playwright works is we're gonna instantiate a Playwright session and then a context and then a browser. So now we've got the Playwright session and we're going to instantiate the browser context. Oh yeah, I have to create the browser first. So now I can create the context from the browser. And finally, I'll create my page that's actually going to drive the tests. Okay, so that's going to spin up everything I need to actually start writing my test. Handful of steps that when we look at MS Test you won't have to do, but this gives us a little bit more control over specifying options for the session, the browser, the context, or the page. So first things first is we need to just go to the web page. And then at this point I can start grabbing my selectors, which because I own this website, I've added data test IDs to everything. Back in the past, it was, add just a regular ID for everything. Certain frameworks use that ID for certain things now. So the kind of the new approach or the recommended approach for Microsoft is add this data test ID property onto your elements. And I'm going to put them up here. Once we click into there, I need to input my choice. Which, another constant. Let's do player, choice, input. So part of the reason I'm making these separate property or separate constants instead of just hard coding them here in my test is for the page object model, which is an approach to writing automated tests that says segregate how you describe your page from what your tests are doing. And the point for that is to reduce essentially having selectors and certain functionality spread out throughout your code. So if something on the page changes, which let's be honest, it probably will, you go and you change it in one spot. You change it in your page object. You don't have to go into all of your tests and change them there. And then let's do one assert. Let's make sure that this guy shows up so that we know that the computer is actually playing. Okay, so I've got all of my selectors that I think I'll need. Now we can start doing interesting things with them. Playwright well, here, let's actually show some of those. Playwright has a whole bunch of built-in, not get type, a whole bunch of built-in selectors. And then they have actually even more than this. They support CSS, XPath, all that normal stuff. And they also support relative selectors, which is really handy for pages you don't control. So, one example, I was working on a page where the login username and password, the IDs were auto-generated for whatever reason. And they were both inputs. There really wasn't a whole lot of identifying characteristics about them. So with the relative selector, I was able to say, hey, that first input box, if it has a label of email, use that, and then get me the next input box that's below that input box. So you can do positional identifying off of your page. And so you can have some very reliable selectors. Email is probably not going to be a label that changes. If you do, it's probably to something like username or some other identifiable piece of information. So there are a lot of options for selecting. And we need to do this nav button. And then we need to, I guess, probably submit some information. So fill is equivalent to send keys if you're familiar with Selenium. Okay, and this is where it's going to get a little weird with XUnit. So the sort of helpers that I mentioned that are in MS Test, they don't provide for XUnit for one specific reason, and it's because this is all asynchronous. XUnit doesn't take your typical view of parallelization that MS Test or NUnit does. XUnit operates like if you were to await anything else. And so if you go on Stack Overflow, there's people that are like, I've got 1,000 tests and I run them and it opens up 1,000 browsers. Why? And it's like, well, because you awaited something, and I don't understand the specifics very well. A couple of people over here can tell you more, but from what I understand, it gives back the thread and Windows goes, here we go use it for something else, I guess. So some of these helpers are not in XUnit because they support it-ish, but then you have to really know how to control the parallelization with XUnit. So with that in mind, I don't have certain helpers in this specific scenario where I'm waiting on an API to return. And so I kind of have to do some state checking like I would in Selenium. And I could do, well, the simplest would be, well, let's be descriptive. So this will actually wait for me because I'm giving it a specific thing to wait on. I'm not at this point. What I really want to do is assert that that text has some value in it. So this is a way that I can wait for it to be visible. And since I've got it, I can assert on it. I'm a big fan of assert messages, helps you debug very easily. And then I can look, I don't actually remember, computer pics. I want to make sure that shows up. Nope, well, yeah, no, I'll keep that. I actually want to do contains. Oh, I put the wrong, yeah, okay, I'll rename that. Yeah, that should be computer choice. There we go. And this should actually be computer choice. There we go.
Your line 25. So sorry, in line 27, you replace the await page get by SID computer choice with computer choice. Oh wait, it is visible. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Get by SID twice there. You could call it on 25 or
No, and if I were doing this for real, I would have a separate class that would look something like, all my selectors would be in here, and then I would have a, I don't know, let's say, submit, yeah, submit player choice. And then I would be a little bit more deliberate in, let's do, I think it's a locator. So wait, page dot get, oops. I would have to have a constructor to take in, the page. But yeah, I'd be a little bit more deliberate in that. There's no advantage to that. So let's take, I was gonna say, I'm a big fan of code reviews. So, so now if I run this, oops, it won't work, but it will tell us why. And let's, maybe. That's not actually the error I was expecting. I'm surprised. So apparently, doing the dry run, I installed Playwright already. There is an installation step with Playwright, and it will give you a message that says, run this command to install PowerShell and bring in dependencies. And it's pulling in your Chrome driver. What does it support? Chrome driver, Firefox, WebKit, well, Chromium, I guess. So Chromium, Firefox, WebKit. It pulls in the dependencies for you, and it gives you the command to run. It says execute pwsh, path to your bin directory or your output directory, PowerShell.ps1 install. So that was the error I was hoping to get. But we'll address this one. As you may have noticed or not, it's headless by default. So we can go ahead and add in a new browser type launch options. Headless equals false. And we can, I'll just set a breakpoint right there, right before the failure. Okay, so I may have a race condition, which is fine. We can still address that as well. Unless I inverted a selection somewhere. Computer choice is visible. Yeah, oh yeah, so I think I have a race condition. I think this is running before it's actually visible. But that's okay. Let's take a look at some network interception, which they give you, let's see, run, and they give you a whole bunch of these helper methods. That's the one I want. So what these do, and this is where that async method and async stuff comes in. You can build up lists or series of things to do that are predicated on other things finishing, even if you don't know when they're going to finish, if that makes sense. So in this case, it's a very simple example. I need to click this button. It invokes an API. I don't know when that API is going to finish, but when it is finished, then I want to continue on. There are other situations where you can do things like, same thing, submit some information, some piece of information, and you can wait for console logs. You can wait for the DOM to change. I think those are probably the three main ones. So in this case, we're going to wait for an API to finish. Oops. And this delegate takes the click. And then I need to go to my trusty dev tools. Let's just admit that. And we've got two APIs we're using, one to validate the user choice, player choice, and then another one to actually submit it and have the computer try and figure out what to do with it. which I think right now is random. I haven't touched that particular part of the project in like a year, so I don't quite remember where I left it. And I can specify the API to wait on. No, hold on. Let's do something a little bit different. Let's do API. Let's see if I remember the syntax. URL contains. There we go. I don't want to hard code this because maybe, I know I did up here, but maybe in some world, this will have a dev environment and a production environment. So I will do URL contains, and I can do status. That's what they call it. That's a great question. I don't know. Yeah, see, I don't think so. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, right? Right? Weird how often that's come up. Let's see if that does it now. Right? Yay, success. Okay. So, had to do a little bit extra state checking. Still, in my experience, better than Selenium. Selenium has its place, but it's abused a lot. It's abused a lot. But unlike Selenium, where it's very deliberate, and if I ask you if this thing is visible now, it's going to tell me right now whether it's visible or not, and if it's not, it's just going to throw. So we still got all that auto waiting on the go to, the click, the fill. We got some of it on the click, but then as you saw, there was an API that we were waiting for, so had to add one extra check. Any questions about that before I pop to an API test?
So you mentioned that it'll wait for the element to be visible and then give you the yes or no. Is there a timeout you can set on that?
Yes. So question, just to rephrase, is there a timeout on auto waits? There's lots of them. The flexibility in this space, at least for me, was overwhelming at first because I didn't realize that they had this extent of waiting. You have a timeout for your whole suite. You have a timeout per test. You have a timeout per action, so click, fill, etc. And then you can override those timeouts. And you can override them per test or per action. So yes, there is a timeout. The default is, I think it's 15 seconds on an action, 30 seconds for a test, and I don't remember what the suite level is. And then, yeah, and each one of these actions has slightly different criteria. So is visible, we'll wait for it to be present and visible, or it times out and returns false. Is enabled, waits for it to be present, visible, and enabled, or it times out and returns false. So they've kind of taken what you might do with like the Selenium expected conditions or your own custom WebDriver waits, and they've just said, hey, we have common scenarios that we handle for all of these. Let's just put them in tool.
So specifically with visibility, I know that can be a bit of an issue sometimes on certain web pages where elements are hidden, but they are present on the page.
Mm-hmm.
How does Playwright handle stuff like that?
If it doesn't meet the positive criteria, it returns false, basically. With a couple of exceptions, they do enforce, if you do selectors like this, they do enforce that you only get one back, or else it will throw an error. If I were to have two, whatever, RPS-nav data test IDs, it will detect both and throw an error and say you either have to specify the first one or an nth one. or change your selector. Other than that,
So will this work headless?
yeah, the first time I ran it was headless. And it's just this option. You just take that out, and by default, it just does it headless.
So is there some sort of get by test ID that gets a collection?
Yeah, it's it might not be those. Let's see. Yeah, if I remember, I think you can do. Yeah, there is. I honestly haven't used it in a long time. But yes, there is. Any other questions on the UI test side? Cool. Let's write a quick API test. I know this is going to be async. So very similar. We're going to start with Playwright. Maybe did I go down too far? Oh yeah. Basic syntax helps. All right, equals new. Await. Playwright, create async. Thank you. All right. And then let's see. I need to go. What is it? API request context rules. Await. Playwright. API request. New context. And now I can do. Well, let's do API response. Response equals context dot post. That's a spoiler, sorry. So I know that this is a post, the one that we were looking at earlier that we submitted rock to. So in this case, and it just takes, it helps if I get the right one actually. That's the one I wanted. And let's do paper. Oh, probably that. There we go. That's not the right button. So now I have my response, and I can assert. Nope, equal. There we go. On the status. So yeah, so that, like, there you go. That's it. You don't have to pull in Rust Sharp. You don't have to deal with HTTP client. You don't have to pull in whatever your flavor of API call is. They've just packaged it up for you. And if we run it, hopefully I get the right failure this time. Yeah. So, well, here, let's expand. Let's expand that. So, self-signed certificate. That is a very informative message. I don't know how many times I've dealt with the response being 0. Like the whole response is just 0. It's like that. I don't know what to do with that. And then after debugging for 4 hours, it's, oh, the certificate changed. Yay. Thankfully, let's see if I remember. I think it's on this guy. Okay. And I can do our handy dandy ignore HTTPS errors, which I honestly don't recommend most of the time. Sometimes contextually may be appropriate. On this particular laptop, there is a certificate authority that just looks like a man-in-the-middle attack. Andrew, you're gonna looks like a man-in-the-middle attack to anything that you're sending out. So if we run that, yay, green. So from here, you know, if you're doing a whole lot of API testing, you could take the response. Well, actually here, I'm going to show you guys, because if you don't know about this, this is super handy. I'm going to copy that, get back to the right one, And this is where the raw string literals is going to be so amazing. There we go. And now if I wanted to, let's not leave it as that. Response. Response. Deserialized. Response equal, let's see, system. What is it? Text. JSON. Serialization. Nope. Yes, thank you. Deserialize my response with, let's see, await response. Yeah, text async I think should work. So if you wanted to, you could deserialize it, do some interesting stuff like make sure his player selection valid returned true when I expected it to be true. Okay, I'm going to pop over to MS Test real quick because that's, if you're just doing stuff out of the box, MS Test or NUnit helpers are super duper handy. So pop over here, same thing, do my housekeeping. Yes, thank you. I'm not even going to rename it this time. Realistically, I probably should have had it installed on the second project. I don't think anyone needs to see this twice. If you look down here, Playwright NUnit, and then down there was Playwright MS Test. So now I inherit from page test. And I'm just going to copy those selectors. They're the same. Right away, and I need the URL. That was the one I missed earlier. That should have been a constant, but here we are. I can immediately start doing page dot go to async. Oops, 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 oops. Too much help. And I should await it, and I should change this to async task. And I can await page dot get by test ID, RPS nav button. So it gives you that setup right out of the box. Yep. The benefit is, I mean, oh, well, actually, let me show you one more thing. Let's just finish this out. Page dot get by test ID, player choice input, fill. Let's do paper. Haven't done that yet. Wait, page, get by test ID, submit. There we go. Click. Who here is familiar with Jest? Okay. Expect, I should probably await that. Right? Expect, what am I looking for? Oops. Page dot computer choice. Helps if I get by test ID. Computer choice. To contain text async. Computer picks. Helps if I actually focus on it. So it takes out that step of, okay, I need to find something to wait on, because it's actually co-opting the asserts and saying, okay, you're telling me that it should have this text, so I'm going to auto wait on that text, or for that text to be there. There's not a whole lot of savings on the API side, so I'm not going to, I guess I could if we have got a little bit of time. But,
What is the data type of page?
iPage.
Can you derive from it? So if I got like your home page, you can do specific stuff. So instead of having to type get ID, you can just say.
Excuse me.
Submit button. So just move backwards. So you don't have to keep typing the ID and things like that.
Yeah, and that's where the page object model comes in. I would absolutely expect to never have to do get by test ID in my actual test.
Except it's just inside your page.
Right.
Just put all that stuff inside your page. You're gonna be back.
Yep. Yep.
Does this expect setup that you have here then do that appropriate weighting that you have on the X unit side where it will?
Yes. Yeah, it's a little bit different. Yep. Yeah, it's a little bit different. So instead of waiting on the API call and then waiting for the thing to be visible, this just waits for the thing, in this case, the computer choice label, to be visible and to contain computer picks. So they've done a lot of work. And this is where I was saying earlier, it was, I think, originally a jest fork because some of this stuff is very like, oh, hey, I know that from the one TypeScript project I've worked on.
How does it tell the difference between it hasn't appeared yet or you put the wrong ID, right?
It'll just time out. And then you'll have to know to go check the IDs. So important point. There is a record and playback tool with Playwright. I personally haven't used it. I know a couple people that have, and it seems to do a very good job creating the selectors. From what I've been told, I do always advocate though just a quick review of the selector, because if it's if it gives you an X path that's like //page/div/div/div/ I don't know. Maybe there's probably another div in there. If it gives you this big long gross thing, it's like, well, you can do child combinators and ancestor searches to condense that. So yeah, if you do end up using record like for your first handful of tests, or maybe it's just efficient for you and you do it all the time, that's fine too. I would still recommend reviewing the selectors to make sure they're actually right. Because I've done that. I've written a selector. I'm like, why doesn't this work? And then I just go back to dev tools and pop over to the DOM and I'm like, I don't know, computer pick. Oops, I just had the wrong selector. Anything else? Any other questions? Sure. I haven't. Usually, typically, the UI is going to be the slowest thing in the entire process. I haven't seen that yet, but I also haven't profiled for it. So it's possible if you're running API and UI tests, maybe the API tests take a hit. Again, the UI tests probably are going to run longer unless you have very few of them. But I haven't seen that, but I can't say it's not true. Right. Right. Any other questions?
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you.